Okay. Congressman, you heard the president's speech. You didn't like it very much and said so. But then the president was out talking to some campaign contributors out in Chicago, and it turns out the conversation was recorded, and about your plan and about you, he was using words, he basically said you were irresponsible. I want you to hear what he said.
So when Paul Ryan says his priority is to make sure that we're, he's just being America's accountant and, trying to, be responsible. I mean, this is the same guy who voted for 2 wars that were unpaid for, voted for the Bush tax cuts that were unpaid for, voted for the prescription drug bill that cost as much as my health care bill but wasn't paid for. So it's not on the level.
So what about that, Congressman?
Look, I could go point by point on all of those things, but I don't see how productive it would be to get into a partisan bickering match with the president. I'm going to do that because we got things to do. And the way I look at things, Bob, is we have divided government right now. We have work to do, problems to solve. And in divided government, I think it helps if we treat each other with respect. There's plenty of time for campaigning. Look, the president doesn't have a primary opponent. He doesn't even have an announced Republican opponent yet. There was plenty of time for him to do campaigning later. Right now, we got things to do. We got problems to solve. And so I think it would just be more productive if we put the campaign rhetoric aside and get on to focusing on treating each other with respect. And look, both parties have done this to each other. I'm not saying, only one party does this, but I think the tone gets set at the top. And I think it'd be more productive if the tone set at the top was one more of mutual respect, one more of getting things done and coming together to solve problems.
Well, that is a little bit different than what you told Charlie Rose right after the president's speech. You said, I guess we're going to have to do this without the president. We're not getting any leadership from him. You seem to be saying that you weren't even willing to sit down with him. Are you now willing to sit down with the other side?
Of course I am. I was not saying we weren't willing to. We've never been invited to sit down with him. What I was talking about at the time was he appointed a fiscal commission last year to come up with solutions. They came up with solutions. He disavowed their solutions. And now he's coming up with yet another commission to come up with solutions. My point is we need to lead, and we shouldn't be delegating these tough decisions to other people to make. We've got to make tough decisions to save our country from a debt crisis, to get this economy growing, and to pay off our debt so our children get a debt-free nation. That's what we're doing. We're putting actual ideas on the table to fix these problems. We're not asking other people to do it. And so my point is, if our leaders are not actually leading, that doesn't get things done. And so we're going to lead. We're putting ideas out there, and we're not kicking it to other people to make decisions like other commissions. And that's the point I was making when I was talking to Charlie Rose.
You have 2 very different approaches that are now out there. The president wants to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans. He wants to keep Medicare in place. The big part of the savings in your plan is to do away with Medicare, replace it with private insurance that would be subsidized by the government, and you actually want to lower taxes on the wealthy, even lower than the Bush tax cuts, which were enacted during the Bush administration. I guess the question I would have, Congressman, why do these rich people need another tax cut? I mean, they're already rich. They seem to be doing pretty well as it is now. Why cut their taxes some more?
So first of all, we're not talking about cutting taxes. We're just not agreeing with the president's tax increases. I guess that's the new definition of tax cuts. We're saying keep tax rates where they are right now and get rid of all those loopholes and deductions, which, by the way, are mostly enjoyed by wealthy people, so you can lower tax rates. We're basically taking a page out of the playbook of the Fiscal Commission. The president's Fiscal Commission, supported by a majority of Democrats, said the same thing. Broaden the tax base, lower the tax rates for economic growth. A simpler, flatter, fair tax code, more internationally competitive so we can create jobs. That's what we're proposing. This isn't tax cuts. It's tax reform, targeting our revenues at where they are right now. We're just not signing on to all the tax increases that the president's proposing. On Medicare, let me just tell you, no change would occur to anybody 55 years of age or above. The problem is Medicare goes bankrupt in 9 years. And unless we do something to save it, it won't be there for future generations like my generation. And the ideas we're talking about for reforming Medicare is a system that works just like the one that I have as a member of Congress that federal employees have. It works like the prescription drug benefit works now for seniors, which is proven to lower costs and expand choices. And also, it's an idea that has come from both parties in the past. It has traditionally had bipartisan support in the past. And I would simply say the president had one idea he gave us on Wednesday, which is have this board of 15 people that he appoints ration and price control Medicare for current seniors. So we just don't think government rationing on Medicare is the answer. We think we should keep the promise to current seniors, people 10 years away from retiring, but then reform the system for the next generation so that it's safe and solvent for current seniors and for future generations, because Medicare is going bankrupt.
All right, let me just go back to what you said there at the top. You say you're not for cutting taxes, but am I misinformed? I thought you were talking about lowering that rate for the top income taxpayers back to about 25%. So isn't that a tax cut?
That's right. In exchange for losing your deductions. So in exchange for losing the loopholes and deductions that mostly higher income earners use. So what we're saying is keep tax revenues where they are. Don't lower tax revenues, but clean up the tax code so that it works. If you have really high tax rates, what you end up doing is you penalize small businesses. You have to remember, Bob, most successful small businesses file their taxes as individuals. Most of our jobs come from these small businesses. The president is proposing to raise the top tax rate on these small businesses to 44.8%. We don't think that's good for jobs. We don't think that's good for economic growth. And when we tax our employers a whole lot more than our foreign competitors tax theirs, we lose, they win, and we don't want that. So just like the Fiscal Commission, the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission said, lower tax rates, broaden the tax base for economic growth, and that's exactly what we're proposing.
I guess the part that I don't quite understand, and I take your proposal to be a serious one, but the part I don't understand is if the country is going bankrupt, if the country needs to borrow 40 cents of every dollar that it spends, how do you help that by reducing the amount of taxes that the richest people in the country pay? It would seem to me that's where you get revenue. How do you justify
Two things. Number one, we don't have a tax problem. Our revenues are going back to where they have been historically. We have a big spending problem. Spending is growing at a very unsustainable rate. So let's focus on spending. The other thing I would simply say is massive tax increases. The president's proposing $1.5 trillion in tax increases. The Democrats in Congress are proposing anywhere from $2 to $16 trillion in tax increases based on the 3 budgets to the floor the other day. We don't want to slow down the economy. Here's what we're trying to get. Spending cuts and controls to get spending under control, because that's the problem, and economic growth and job creation. We don't want to give up one to get the other. Raising tax rates on anybody, especially successful small businesses, slows down the economy, loses jobs, and if you have lower economic growth, you have less revenues, and it puts you further behind. We want more tax revenues, but we want to get it by expanding job creation, by expanding economic growth. So the secret to success here is economic growth and job creation through tax reform, not tax cuts, tax reform at the same levels, get better economic growth, which we get more revenues, and also focus on the problem. The problem is spending. The problem is how much we've been spending and how we spend, and we have to reform those. And that's what we really want to be focusing on here.
Let me go back to the debt ceiling and that question, which we talked about at the very top here. You're saying that there are going to have to be some spending cuts agreed
That's
to.
Right. And controls.
And controls before Republicans will be willing to vote to raise the debt limit. Tell me specifically what those conditions would be. What do you want before you're willing to do that?
Well, we don't really see this as before. We see this in conjunction with. So we're not really interested in negotiating through the media. There are many different ways of putting caps on spending. The budget we propose has 3 different kinds of caps on spending. Caps on what we call discretionary spending in law. Those have worked. Republicans turned them off in the 1990s. They were successful. We should go back down that path again. Global caps on total government spending. There's deficit caps, debt caps. There's lots of different ways of controlling spending. And we also think we need to lock in the gains that were achieved in the continuing resolution and get some spending cuts there and carry those savings on into the future so we can actually save money. So what we're saying here is spending cuts and controls in conjunction with raising the debt limit. That's what we've been saying all along.